The Congress party leveraged the promise of the 5 guarantees to unseat the BJP and come to power in Karnataka in 2023. 2 years on, as we approach the state budget for 2025-26, the question is, what next and what more? The budget session of the Karnataka legislature got off to a stormy start on March 3rd, and more turbulence is expected in the days to come, especially around the guarantee schemes and the allegedly troubled state economy. Is Karnataka on the brink of insolvency? Should the Siddaramaiah-led government shift its focus away from guarantee schemes? Namaskara, welcome to Decode Karnataka. I'm Nalme Nachiyar. Chief Minister Siddaramaiah, who holds the finance portfolio, is scheduled to present his record 16th budget on March 7th. The size of the budget is expected to touch 4 lakh crore, up from 3.71 lakh crore last year. However, the government's policies have been under intense scrutiny. There has been a rise in the price of essential services and commodities like milk, fuel, bus and Namma metro fares, and this is being linked to the financial burden of funding the guarantees. In an all-out attack, State BJP President B.Y. Vijayendra has claimed that Karnataka is moving towards complete bankruptcy under the Congress government. The opposition has accused the government of fiscal mismanagement, diversion and misallocation of funds, reckless borrowing and mounting debts, as well as non-payment of dues to beneficiaries. Have guarantees led to fiscal indiscipline, and must Karnataka rethink its economic planning and trajectory? We discuss with Narendar Pani, economist and visiting professor at the School of Social Sciences, National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bengaluru. Hi sir, welcome to Decode Karnataka. Thank you for giving us your time today.
My pleasure.
So this is sort of a precursor episode that we are doing for the budget Karnataka 2025. The Siddaramaiah government has been under immense pressure from the opposition and sometimes even within its own ranks regarding the guarantees, which have been making news over the course of the last 2 years, ever since they were first proposed pre-poll and then they were implemented post the government came to power. But very recently, the state BJP president came out saying that he demanded that the government release a white paper because he says the Congress government is the Karnataka government is moving towards bankruptcy and economic crisis. There are also allegations of the very same guarantees not being dispersed to beneficiaries. Would you say the guarantee schemes have weighed heavily on the state treasury?
I think there is a bit of a misconception about the guarantees. It's seen as guarantees versus development, as if it's a trade-off between the two. But I would argue that essentially it is like you go in for guarantees when your growth has not been inclusive enough. That's the immediate provocation for guarantees. So that's the purpose of development. That's the purpose of your growth. If it's a pressure on your finances, tough luck. But essentially, as one of the states with the highest per capita income in the country, you cannot afford to have substantial sections of your population under economic distress. Right? Now, ideally, you would have a growth strategy where the more rapid the growth, the fewer people under economic distress. But that's not been the case in Karnataka. In Karnataka, you've had a problem of one section doing very well, particularly those relate to high-tech employees and those connected with the global market, whereas the rest of the economy has stayed behind. In that kind of a situation, a transfer of benefit from those who are doing extremely well to those who are doing very poorly becomes essential.
Okay.
Right. So the two, even in terms of purely a growth-oriented strategy, if you're going to retain, you cannot say I'm probably the second fastest growing major state in the country, and then continue with a situation where you have extreme poverty. So that is one part of it.
So it was necessary. The guarantees were.
I think that's what development is about. I cannot go to a hungry man and say I'm growing at 7%. Right? It means nothing. Growth, unless growth can be converted into human benefit, it is just a number.
Okay.
Right? So if you can do it directly, so much the better. But if you fail in that path, right, then you have to find some other ways of doing it. Right? The issue goes further, I think, because Karnataka is essentially the growth in Karnataka has been services led.
Right.
Which means there is a premium on human development. And you need to then directly target areas where human development is hurt. One of the areas where there is a problem is in terms of women's employment. That women's presence in the workforce has not been substantial. And one of the elements that comes in with that is that one of the reasons that is often cited is that because they're not exposed. So you might have people who have got an engineering degree, but IT firms will say they're unemployable. Right. So you need sort of guarantees or initiatives, welfare, call them what you want, that will get women out into the world. And I think the transport subsidy is one element in that.
So you save on transport, and then electricity subsidy is there. You also get Griha Lakshmi, where the women head of the household is paid. But is skilling a problem then? Like, you've now exposed them and given them enough.
I think the issue of skilling is linked to the nature of education. That's also important. But I don't think these measures go together. They are not one or the other.
Yeah, no, not one or the other. Like, after this, would you say?
Right. So I would think you build a full strategy from there.
Right.
So Bangalore's growth has been based on technical manpower. Now, technical manpower itself comes from early English education. And early English education took a very substantial initiative of the government dating back to the early decades of the 20th century.
Okay.
We forget that UVC was started in 1917. We forget that Mysore had the first reservations in the country which allowed people of all castes to benefit.
Okay.
Other than maybe the Dalits. But apart from that, all other castes benefited and could get some education, technical education. Therefore, you had a workforce that was ready to cater to the communications revolution. If we do not ensure that one half of your workforce has the skills to deal with the world, with the global market, you're hurting yourself.
Right.
You're hurting growth. So even as a pure growth strategy, measures like this are essential. They have worked in the past, going back to the 20th century, early 20th century, and I think it's become a necessity now.
Okay. So that sort of ties in with the next thing that I wanted to ask. Now that we've had it, now that it's benefited a chunk of the population, what next? Like, should we go beyond guarantees, and if we do, what does going beyond mean?
That's a larger question, which really boils down to the idea that what's happening in Karnataka, like in many other parts of India, is that you're getting a movement out of agriculture. Right? As opportunities emerge, or at least perceptions of opportunities emerge, people
movement out of, like, the sector, people moving
out
away
of
from
agriculture.
Okay.
Right. And it's also because with each generation, the farms get divided among family members.
Yeah.
They become smaller and some of them become unviable. So there's a pressure to move out of agriculture. Now, as that pressure develops, ideally, you would have that movement being matched by capital also moving out of agriculture. So the richer agrarian families start investing, and these people moving out of agriculture work there. Now, that happened only in one district, or what was one district, now maybe two, and that is Dakshin Kannada and Udupi. Right? Where the early agricultural boom led to a demand for exports, cashew nuts and other elements, which led to a demand for financial services, because otherwise they had to wait for the Imperial Bank to come from Chennai.
So then the bank.
So the earliest private initiatives, and some of them which are now major banks, Canara Bank, Syndicate, Corporation Bank, and little later Vijaya Bank. I mean, they all came up in that period relating to that, primarily from that area. Elsewhere in the state, that has not happened.
Okay.
So then it becomes necessary for the state to step in to ease that process. One of the things that could be done, or would be to actually increase the possibility of workers leaving their fields, or agriculture leaving their fields, while that will get cultivated, without the fear of the loss of land.
Okay, how?
Right. So what I've been sort of arguing is that essentially what we need to do is develop a kind of an institution which cannot own land, but can provide agricultural services.
So those fields kept getting.
So the farmers, even if they have to work in Bengaluru, can actually have their fields cultivated, can take all the decisions as
Okay.
long as this agency provides all the services required for that.
Right.
If it succeeds, it can go all the way from sowing to the market, the entire process. You need to think along those lines so that on one side you will you allow workers to take up whatever jobs they get wherever they get it, while their land continues to be cultivated. On the other side,
But we will still need agricultural labor to do that.
yes, that those who want to be agricultural labor will be there. It will be made more efficient. You can even mechanize agriculture if the workers are moving out in any case, right? Then you can have a greater mechanization of agriculture. Right? Alongside, those institutions can also help in mobilizing rural capital. And get it out. You see, today you're in a situation because of a Bangalore-centric high-tech growth that the only rural capital that's being mobilized is going into politics.
Right.
Right? Whereas that capital, if you give it economic opportunities or other, then you get a more balanced growth. There are options. The issue is that whether we are going to look for them.
Okay. Slight tangent from what you're saying. There is Brand Bengaluru. There is Beyond Bengaluru. Beyond Bengaluru, of course, tries to move IT clusters to these tier 2,
yes, but
tier
that's
3
the whole
cities.
point. Now, if I'm going to move IT clusters into areas which are not connected to the IT industry, all that you're doing is moving the labor force there, which makes it more expensive.
Right. Yeah.
If you can do it.
I think that's why it's not taken off as the government thought
because
it would.
it will not, because the government sometimes thinks it is God. That if it decides something, it will happen. Right? That's not always the case. Cities, economies have a mind of their own. They have impulses of their own. Right? The most successful governments are those that intervene in those impulses.
Okay.
Right? But governments that try to start from scratch each time, as if what is happening does not matter, typically are less successful.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So that sensitivity to what are the processes that are happening, even in Bangalore, even within Bangalore, if you look at any indicator, Bangalore is growing to the south. Right? An efficient strategy would be to increase that impulse, help it grow. What the government tries to do is to build symmetry. So you're investing all your resources in the north.
All the resources?
In the north.
In the north, okay.
Right, your IT industry, which is your main source of demand for air travel, is 20-30 kilometers to the south. You build your airport 30 kilometers to the north. Right? People have to travel through the city. Your city traffic comes under pressure. But you believe that if you are the government, you can do what you want. You can create a city out of nothing. Whereas countries like China have been much more sensitive to what's happening on the ground. So they have situations where a small village grows into a metro.
Right.
Because they spotted what is happening, encourage process, and then it takes a moment.
Encourage processes that people have already been skilled to do that.
We haven't even started that process.
Would you say then that Beyond Bengaluru as a concept may never really...
I don't think it's beyond Bengaluru. It has to be what are the initiatives that can grow in each part of the state. The idea of Bengaluru versus the rest is implied in that Beyond Bengaluru
Right,
concept.
correct. Yeah.
Right. Whereas the issue is not that. The issue is really whether you can get growth that happens within that process.
In your own writings, you've said how since 89-90 no ruling power has come back to power. There's that revolving door phenomenon that people keep talking about every time we have an election. But you have said, I think you will basically be elaborating on what you said, that this is because the Karnataka government has always lacked a long-term plan or strategy. Like every government that comes brings with it its own packages and plans and promises to keep. So we have newer things coming and not a long-term thing that government after government seeks to further. So what do you would you suggest? Like, can you elaborate on this?
You see, you need to identify processes of growth that are there. You see, the most successful state economically, to my mind, in India is Tamil Nadu. Right? And there you have had a movement of capital going back to Natiyar Chettiar, it's a long story. But going back from to that period, you have a movement of capital out of agriculture into educational institutions and then into IT sector. You had that entire process, and then the labor has moved along with it, so you've had a smooth process. Their governments have been careful to intervene in that movement and not disrupt it. So the governments, I mean, nobody says, I mean, Karnataka versus Jayalalitha was brutal. The politics was brutal, but this was not affected.
Right.
Because whoever came to power recognized the superiority of the process of the economy of its own. Listen to the economy, don't try to dictate what the economy should be. In Karnataka, for various reasons, we have tried to dictate what the economy should be. Right? And which means each government comes in typically with an external idea. You get somebody from New York or somewhere and tell them this is how it was done in Chicago some time back or something like that. And
aiming
then you put it here.
Global outlook, a world class.
Well, but that assumes that the conditions in Bangalore today are what was in Chicago at that point of time, which is obviously not true. Right? So you end up with disruption at all points of time, which leads these governments to divert their resources or focus their resources on guarantees, on welfare. It forces them to do it, whichever form of welfare it takes. And that is not enough, because once you get into competitive welfare, whatever you promise, I promise more. What does it matter?
Right.
So the issue is whether you can get a government, whether we can even take the basic first step of saying, all right, what are the processes that are occurring on the ground in different parts of Karnataka? What are the industries they'll find it easiest to absorb? Then can we take those advantages and present it to industry and see if it tracks them?
So this budget, at least, there has been a talk of going beyond the economy of guarantees to more, and we have discussed that. But do you have a wish list for what we need from this? What the Siddaramaiah government should
So there are
deliver?
two aspects to budget. One is what it's the technical aspect. That is what you save, what you spend, what you your deficits, etc. Which, given his record, I would expect a fairly conservative attitude towards the deficits. He's always been pretty careful, and I would presume he would that would stay. The issue is that budgets in India are also statements of policy. So are we going to see anything in this budget that reflects some of the other concerns we were speaking about?
Right.
Are we going to see a willingness to recognize that each district has its own economic logic? Are we going to try to understand that logic? Are we going to try to intervene in processes that are already there? Or are we going to just lay out large numbers and decide that if I give more money, it must work? That's just not true.
But I think that is most likely what has been happening, considering the last two where...
That's what's been happening.
But to sort of shift course, what could be a catalyst? Like, what would it take? Because economists like you may have mentioned this aspect over and over again.
I think it's a matter of the concept of the economy. Do we have a macroeconomic picture of why Karnataka has become the kind of economy it is? You see, we get very caught up in growth rates, and as long as you're fixated only on the growth rate, you will be happy with the fact that the IT sector is taking you through.
I think that's what Siddaramaiah said in response to this whole Ravichandran thing. He said, we've grown at a better rate than the previous government did. So I think that was the argument. But they continue to present that as a way to
That's become
deflect.
the norm. All governments are doing it. I mean, it has become a law that you see success in terms of growth rates. You don't see success in terms of human development.
Okay.
You don't see success in terms of what happens to quality of life of people in Karnataka. And that is more of a mental block which is difficult to shake.
Okay. While the 5 guarantees are a necessary income support initiative, it may be time for the Siddaramaiah government to create parallel processes that can further the benefits of social welfare and take a broader and long-term approach for sustainable economic growth. We'll be following the budget closely, so stay tuned for our in-depth coverage. I'll see you in the next episode of Decode Karnataka. Until then, follow The Hindu for more such stories and videos.